Should you rent a DYNA Firewood processor? I just got done with a 3-day rental, and I'm going to give you a bunch of things that you should consider before you rent one. So I just got done with 3 days of the DYNA Firewood processor rental, and 22 hours of usage is I think what I put on the meter. I had up to 24 hours available in that 3-day rental. And the output here, you can see, I mean, there are piles of wood all around me. I got through quite a bit of wood, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But some considerations for you guys are, first off, do you have processor quality wood? That's probably the single biggest thing, because if you don't have good straight logs to run through the processor, you're going to have a challenging time getting good quality output through it. So the types of logs that I have, actually I've got a handful here just that I didn't get around to. These are actually some of the good straight ones that are left, with the exception of this one in the middle. You can probably see it kind of does a little curve there. What I was planning on doing with this one, if I got around to it, was trying to cut off before it starts to do that aggressive curve and just put the straight section through the processor. This big knot right here needed to get cut off. I didn't get around to that. This big crotch on the end needed to get cut off. I didn't get around to that. So those are some examples of some logs that weren't ideal for the processor. And if you had a lot of stuff like this, you better spend some time sorting through your logs and cleaning the knots and the branches and the crotches up off of your logs before you put them on the processor, or you're going to have jam ups. You're going to have some that won't feed in on the in-feed chain. You're just going to have different kinds of challenges. So quality of logs is maybe the first big consideration, and if you don't have them, a processor rental is probably not a good idea for you. The next big consideration, I would say, is probably staging. The area you have to work with your firewood processor is going to dictate partially how efficient and how much output you're going to get from that machine. So with its 16-foot conveyor, you're going to make a pile about 12 to 13 feet tall, possibly, and then that whole machine is going to need to move, or you're going to need to use other equipment or trailers to move the wood away from the machine, one or the other. In either case, you are not splitting wood when that's happening, theoretically, unless you've got a bunch of helpers, and that's going to impact your output as well. I think the name of the game through all of this is trying to maximize your output and maximize that investment in renting the processor and trying to get as much wood done as possible. So anything that you can do to improve the efficiency is going to increase your output, and it's going to make that rental seem like a better value. In the future, I'm going to make some changes here. For example, these big trees that are right behind me are going to come out, and that's going to make this area up here a little bit more navigable. The other challenge I have is that most of this up here is reasonably flat, but the best flattest area is pretty small, and that's where I wanted to set up the processor, because it would be easiest to set it up in that area with the least amount of leveling and other adjustments that need to be made. And then on that note, the last thing, I would probably try to get my piles of logs just slightly closer to where I'm working, because there was a lot of time spent driving the tractor around, going to retrieve logs and bringing them to the machine. It's not that far, but it's just far enough that that extra 10 or 15 seconds per log over hundreds of logs adds up and takes away from the productivity, especially if you're working by yourself, which I was the entire time. If you had someone else helping you that could load the machine, they would have trouble keeping up with, or you would have trouble as the operator keeping up with them bringing you logs, even if it was just a slight little drive away. So cost versus output is probably another consideration. In a single day, I got about 1.5 of these piles. That's about it. I estimate maybe 8 or 9 cords is probably the most I got done in a single day, and that was probably stretching it by myself. If you had a helper, if you could keep the machine moving and you can actually keep it running for 8 hours in a single day, you could get more than that. But realistically, by myself, I never got more than maybe a cord and a half an hour, and that was about it. So if you're really thinking about doing just a 1-day rental, my machine, for example, was $475 a day. I've seen DYNA's rental listings out there on the internet for as much as $600 a day. So if you're really thinking about how much wood you're going to get in the given period of time, you've got to factor in what that realistic output is going to be. I know they advertise that the machines can do over 2 cords an hour, but that's under ideal circumstances with absolutely perfect wood, and those conditions don't really exist in the real world for the majority of us. As far as usability of the machine goes, it was drop dead easy to use. Just a couple levers to understand how they work, and within a matter of maybe an hour, hour and a half, really starting to feel like have a good hang of it, have an understanding of what the capabilities of the machine are, and be able to work efficiently is all that it took. The only potential thing from an operator standpoint you might look into is an auto return on the splitting stroke. The machine I rented did not have an auto return, so every time the push block would push towards the wedge, you had to push a lever to send it back, and when it was going back, you couldn't really do the cutting motion. So there was plenty of time where I'm just waiting for 2 or 3 or 4 seconds for the push block to move back before I could start my next cut. That is, when you're trying to do a lot of cutting, a lot of wood, that is a big productivity loss, those extra couple seconds per cut. So if you're really focused on the maximum productivity and getting as much out of the machine rental as possible, look for a machine that has the auto return. This gets into kind of my only gripe about the machine. It had a stick that hung down as the measuring stick for to tell you how far to advance the log off of the in-feed roller, and that would give you the cut length on each piece of firewood. Unfortunately, the way that it hung, the owner of the machine had hung that stick by a carabiner, which is not the standard way that it hangs, and because of that, it would sometimes hang a little to the left and sometimes hang a little to the right, and the cuts that I got throughout here were very inconsistent, and that kind of bothers me a little bit because I have always sticked with 16-inch cuts, and when I go to put wood into my wrapped bundles, having everything the same length makes a really nice looking bundle, and I don't like having shorter pieces or longer pieces mixed all in those bundles. And then the last point is probably, what do you want your final product to be? Perfect firewood for me and the customers that I sell to, being recreational firewood mostly, nice small splits is what they're looking for, 2 to 3 inch maximum. That's what we're looking for. Hand size pieces is what I've heard some other YouTubers call this size wood. Chris in the Woodyard, for example, says nice, good hand size pieces. You can easily pick that piece of wood up in your hand if you're grabbing it on the end. There are plenty of pieces in here that I cannot pick up easily by hand. Take this one, for example. I mean, my hand can easily fit around it, but it's too heavy for me to hold up for an extended period with one hand, especially right now when it's green. And that would need to be resplit to fit in with the type of wood that I sell. And as I look through this and as I will sort and work through this, we're going to have a lot of resplitting to do. There's a lot of wood in here that's just fine as well. I don't know if it's a 50-50 mix or a 80-20 mix at this point. Too hard to say, but we are going to have to go through it, and there is absolutely going to have to be a lot of resplitting. Now, one of the things that made this really worthwhile, this rental period, was that the rental company was actually pretty flexible with me because they didn't have the machine rented or lined up to be rented immediately after me. They didn't hold me to 3 calendar days on my rental, and they let me get an extra couple days. The machine did break down while I was here too, so they kind of gave me a little leeway because of that, but they were flexible with the return time, so I was actually able to take almost 6 days to get my 24 hours of machine usage, and I needed it because of the breakdown and because of the weather. So if the rental company was more picky about sticking to the actual calendar days for the 3-day rental, this would not have been worth it at all for me. One thing I really liked about this whole experience, though, is the fact that I was able to get through 40 cords of logs in just a couple days and I hardly had to pick up a chainsaw. And at the end of those couple days, my back didn't hurt, my legs didn't hurt, my arms didn't hurt, and you know, there's just a tremendous amount of output here. So comparing it to hand cutting wood with a chainsaw and hand splitting it with a regular splitter, it is night and day comparison in terms of output and comfort for the operator. It is so much more work to cut and split this with a chainsaw and a splitter, and if you're trying to scale your firewood business, going this route is a must do. I know there's people out there who do hundreds of cords a year and they do it all cutting it by hand, and the only way to scale it, if that's what you're doing, is by adding labor. And labor's expensive and labor's unreliable, and that is why I'm not really going that route at this stage in my business, and I'm looking for ways to mechanize as much as I can so that I can add scale. So will I rent the DYNA processor again? I'd say the verdict's still out. I'm leaning towards yes, because it really wasn't a bad experience at all. And in fact, the positives far outweigh the negatives at this stage. What I don't know at this point is how much work and how much of a commitment do I really need to make in resplitting, sorting through this wood and resplitting. I think it's going to be significant, but it's going to take me a while to figure that out. And if there was a way to get my hands on a processor that was capable of producing the final product, the wood, the way that I like to produce it, which I can show you some. I got some in a crate right here. If there was consistent hand-sized pieces coming off the processor that looked like this stuff, you know, not lots of nice little rectangles and triangles. If we had a way to produce that size piece consistently, then I would be much more interested in operating that type of processor than the DYNA that I had with its 6-way wedge, which depending on the size of the wood coming in through there may require lots of resplitting. Let me know if there are other things about the machine you want to know, or if you've got any other questions about it. I think I hit on pretty much everything you need to know, and I'll keep you posted as I work through this and try to figure out how much work that's going to be to give me my optimal final product that I sell. But for now, that wraps it up for me. Appreciate you spending a little bit of time with me. I'll see you on the next video. Bye-bye.